So I'd like to share a story with you about how NetGhost can help your organization. I was brought in to consult with a Fortune 15 customer who had purchased an existing firewall orchestration solution. They were paying upwards of $1 million on a recurring subscription to use this product. And as it turns out, every single requester, operations engineer, information protection engineer were miserable, and they were angry at each other. Tickets were taking 15 days at a minimum to be implemented, when at max, with the SLAs that were set, it should have been 8 days. And yet every team in the organization was meeting their SLA. So how did this happen, and why is everyone angry at each other? So throwing money at a problem doesn't fix the problem always. Maybe it can, but not always. So the existing orchestration tooling on the market did not fit well within their organization processes, what the teams were used to, and what was required to complete requests. Traditionally, before the $1 million tooling, requesters would submit requests on ServiceNow, and operations engineers and information protection engineers would review that request and interact with it in a very manual method. Everyone was using ServiceNow. Now, an external tool has been purchased, and information protection and operations is now navigating in that external tool, which is lightly integrated with ServiceNow. So requesters would submit a request, and effectively it would be a black box. The data that information protection needed was not present, and so they would kick it back and say, hey, I need this information, which would reset their SLA, allowing them to achieve SLA even if they waited 4 days and 23 hours to kick it back. So that's why tickets were taking so long. The required data was not present, and the communication back and forth was low. So what we did to solve this problem was multi-layered, but quite simple. We made requesters stakeholders in their own request. So here you can see a sample ticket. And here I have input bad IP address, incorrectly spelled object name, and invalid port. So this is entirely invalid. But by the time someone gets to review this, it could be 24 hours later. Then they have to write back, navigate to the tool, then the requester has to see that, take action on it, and so forth. And this process can add up. And then once it reaches information protection, if they don't like it, it can get kicked back again. So making requesters stakeholders in their own request, we began validating automatically the data. So no longer was operations required to review every single request. Now they only had to review the requests that our tool identified as invalid. Requesters would be automatically notified of the problematic input, which allowed them to update their spreadsheets they were copying and pasting from repeatedly, right? Update their notes, and remediate the problem or learn and better understand, all without any required communication from an engineer. They were also made stakeholders not only by communicating the information back to them, but by letting them know automation had identified a problem. So it reduced the animosity between the teams, because it wasn't that information protection was being ridiculous, and it wasn't that operations was incompetent, but automation this time determined, hey, I can't understand this perfectly, and this is going to have to be manually reviewed. This is going to take 24 hours longer. And suddenly requesters are unhappy at what they've done, and they want to do better. And so that's what we saw. Initially, requesters, once we began tracking the metrics, were submitting about 70% of requests month over month, entirely valid, but 100% of requests had to be reviewed manually and input into another ticketing system. Now, requesters were able to stay in the same tool. Requesters are still submitting 30% invalid data initially. However, the operations team no longer has to review 70% of requests, which greatly reduced their workload and stress level. And that's not where the story ends. Consistently, it increased from 70% of valid requests to 80%. And after a year, we were consistently at 90% and over 90% every single month. The requesters had been mostly trained and were inputting mostly good data most of the time. At the end of the day, we went from tickets initially taking 15 days with a lot of animosity between the teams, to the teams no longer have any reason to have animosity toward each other. The tooling identified the problem, and now this operations engineer who is reviewing, is here to help. And now most tickets are being implemented in under 24 hours.